The narcissist weaponizes child custody. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Many people are in agreement that probably one of the worst things that can happen to you with involvement with a narcissist is when you have children with that narcissist. If you find that you are with an abusive narcissist in an intimate relationship, but where you're simply boyfriend and girlfriend that don't live together, have no shared community property, you can end the relationship and implement no contact. You don't have to move out. You can ensure that should the narcissist come to where you live, that you don't answer the door, that you don't speak to them. In some instances, you may even decide to move so they don't know where you've gone to. You can change your number so they can't call you. You can come off social media, lock things down. There's nothing to sort out. There's no divorce to go through, and there's no enduring connection because you don't have children with that individual. The imposition of no contact in those circumstances is undoubtedly easier. Where there are children in the equation, it becomes more difficult, but it is not impossible. I have set out in my excellent assistance packages how to co-parent with a narcissist and child defender, both of which can be found in the Knowledge Vault, detailed advice and practical steps that can be taken to ensure that you get towards your no-contact regime, and even where you are involved in having a child or children with a narcissist, how you can protect your children, and in instances where total no contact isn't achievable, you can get to almost no contact. Those materials are worth their weight in gold. It is invariably the case that certain narcissists will engage in a child custody battle. It's important to note that not all will, and there is merit in testing the resolve of the narcissist at an early juncture as to whether they will seek to go to court in relation to seeing the children. Certain narcissists won't bother. Certain narcissists will make a noise about doing so, but won't bother. It's useful to test whether that is the case rather than giving in and allowing the narcissist continue to have involvement with the children to your detriment. Remember, the narcissist uses the children to get to you as the former intimate partner primary source. The children have a use in terms of the provision of fuel, but they're non-intimate secondary sources, and therefore that fuel isn't particularly potent. Similarly, young children, whilst easy to control, don't provide much by way of residual benefits or character traits. And the main reason that a narcissist continues to have involvement with the children from a union with you is to get to you. You are the bigger prize. Your fuel is the most potent of anybody's as the former intimate partner primary source. The existence of the children means you keep coming up on the radar, which means that the narcissist looks to need to assert control over you, and does so through the children. The narcissist recognizes that the children are an excellent conduit to you. Even though they're an unaware narcissist, they'll be aware that it is a means of prompting a reaction from you. That your emotions naturally are heightened in relation to your children, meaning you're more likely to react. It's an area of sensitivity. And many people who have had the misfortune to be involved romantically with a narcissist and have children with them find that their life is very difficult indeed in relation to extricating themselves from their relationship, and thereafter in relation to the issue of child custody. There is an example here which has been written about in the Guardian newspaper, which demonstrates the way that the narcissist weaponizes child custody for the purposes of asserting control over the ex-partner, the former intimate partner primary source, and does so with a consequence of the reduced living standards of that intimate partner. That the narcissist uses the difficult financial circumstances of the former intimate partner primary source against them for the purposes of trying to get hold of the children. I'm going to read to you what went on, but it also provides an opportunity to point out various instances where this individual would have very much benefited from access to my work because there are a number of errors that the individual made in relation to protecting themselves and their children. The anonymous author writes, "I left an abusive relationship almost a decade ago, but my abuser has kept a noose around my neck every day since." An apt description of how that feels for that particular person. At the time, we had 4 young children, including a 12-month-old baby. I asked my then husband to leave the family home as it was no longer safe for me or the children for him to be there. It hadn't been a safe space for years. 8 years on, I still don't feel safe. Evidently, abuse taking place in the relationship, the sustained devaluation between narcissist and victim. He agreed to leave and turned up with a removal truck to pick up his stuff. The relief was temporary. A week later, he emailed Hoover to say he would no longer pay our shared mortgage or financially provide for the children. Provocation, lack of accountability. I was unemployed and caring for our children full time. I linked in with the domestic violence support services, but no one could prepare me for the ongoing hell he would subject me to. He weaponized custody of the children and began a campaign to financially destroy me. He took half my superannuation and my family home had to be sold. Now, it's not made clear as to how that happened, but it may well be the case that the victim could have done more with regard to using the law to protect her position. It may be that she couldn't, but we're not given the facts of that, but that was certainly something that should be looked at so that her financial position would have been bettered. We were pushed into an insecure rental market as the housing crisis worsened. He tightened the noose. Over the next few years, he was relentless in his attempts to become the primary carer so he could receive family tax benefits and child support payments. In actual fact, it will be the case that he was driven in his attempts to become the primary carer, not so much because of the receipt of those monies, although they would be residual benefits, but because of his need to control her as the former intimate partner primary source. And if this victim was made aware of that at that juncture, she could have done a lot more to make herself a far more unattractive target to him by becoming a flawed reason to extract emotion, meaning that the narcissist's endeavours would have been reduced. As a self-employed worker, she continues, he claimed his income was very low. I returned to work, so he applied for child support. With my income vastly above what he declared, he received a significant amount of child support from me. Again, there may well have been steps that could have been taken to forensically expose the level at which he was declaring and also to protect her position. I returned to work, and he was intent on proving I was an unfit mother, which, of course, she's painted black, so he will believe that that's the case. But it shows the hypocrisy where he still expected her to drop everything, jeopardize her employment and pick up sick children from school. I was in constant fear of getting abusive phone calls or texts at work. Now, it's evident that this individual had not imposed a total or near total no-contact regime, that there could have been much more that she would have been able to do to reduce the risk of receiving abusive phone calls, putting in place steps that could have been done to minimise that and even eradicate it, and also avoid receiving the texts. Naturally, this woman feels that she's under siege. She feels that it's incessant, and she didn't have the right advice at this time to help her try to get towards that no-contact regime and gain some relief from the hoovering of this narcissist, which would have increased her coping mechanism. In 2022, I contacted relevant federal ministers to describe the ongoing financial abuse. I successfully argued to the Child Support Agency that as a self-employed worker, his real income was not being declared and the children and I were suffering. For a short time, I felt free from him, but he successfully appealed against the decision. By this time, I was back working again, and the Child Support Agency backdated the amount I owed him over a 6-month period. Now I was saddled with a debt to my abusive ex-husband. Amid the stress, I lost my job, and we were kicked out of our rental when the owners moved back in. Without regular employment, I was unsuccessful in applying for rental properties. For 3 months we stayed in Airbnbs, caravan parks, whatever I could afford, or we couch-surfed with friends and family. Eventually we were put in a transitional unit through a government-funded housing provider. I was given a list of food pantry charities and a $50 Kmart voucher to buy airbeds. Although we were grateful to have a roof over our heads, it was anything but stable. A small 2-bedroom unit was a struggle for 5 of us. We were promised an affordable 4-bedroom house. It was never eventuated. The abusive texts and emails continued. Again, she could have gained relief from this by implementing certain steps, which then meant that she wasn't exposed to this adverse consequence, that it would have reduced emotional thinking, that it would have enabled her coping mechanism to have been increased. She could also have learnt from me about ways that she could have countered the things that he was saying to the children. For she then writes, "For months he told the children I could not afford to feed them. He told them it was easier and safer for them to stay with him. I notified authorities of my ex-husband's escalation. Safety plans were put in place to flee if he was to turn up. I was advised to apply for the $5,000 domestic violence payment, was told I probably wouldn't qualify. Out of the blue a few months ago, he suddenly and forcibly withheld the children on what was supposed to be our usually weekly handover. He cited housing and employment instability as his reasons. Naturally, of course, the unfortunate circumstances of this lady are being used against her by him, a typical move by a narcissist to use of vulnerability against the victim. At a recent sports game, the only opportunity I have to see my children, my younger son said, 'Mum, what if this goes on forever and Dad never lets us come home to you?' Despite contravening family court orders, he has contacted Services Australia to say he is now 100% custody of the children. He also contacted the schools to say the children were no longer in my care. I am trying everything to get my children back, but relying on legal aid and waiting for mediation is painfully slow. I would certainly suggest to her that mediation is completely pointless and don't waste your time on that. If that fails, an application to the family court could take years to be heard. As a woman living with ongoing domestic violence, the federal government's new policy to support women falls dangerously short. Leaving an abusive partner doesn't mean an end to the abuse. In my experience, it only escalated the efforts to control and destroy me. We urgently need ongoing support for women beyond the $5,000 payment. We need affordable, safe housing. We need more support for women in the family court system to ensure the services are not abused by men. The noose around my neck is now strangling me, and there is no one to catch me." Now, whilst we don't have all of the details of what have gone on, there are various flaws in the way that she has approached this. Now, I'm not blaming her, she is the victim, but what I am suggesting is that if she had access to my work, she could have put in place a range of steps, both in terms of a more effective utilisation of the court system to prevent this individual from having contact with the children, that she would have been in a position to prevent her circumstances being used against her in the way that he has done so, that she would have been able to compile a body of evidence that would have enabled her to utilise that as against him, that she would have been able to put in place a near total no-contact regime, which would have spared her much of the abuse, much of the anxiety, much of the fear that she has experienced, enabling her to parent more effectively, possibly aiding her with regard to better employment and domestic circumstances, which would then not be used against her. There's an array of information that I could have provided her, along with practical tips and understanding of what she's dealing with. I have little doubt that she has made numerous errors with regard to her dealings with this individual, not because she's stupid, but because she doesn't understand precisely what she's dealing with and hasn't had access to the right information to help her. This is an example of where a lady in difficult financial circumstances and less than attractive domestic setup has had that used against her as a means for weaponizing child custody. What she obviously doesn't understand, like many people, is that the narcissist here is using child custody to get to her for the purposes of controlling her. And that, undoubtedly, if she had corrected the ways that she has interacted with this individual, both in terms of lessening them, improving the no-contact regime, and not reacting in a particular way, she would have found life far easier. This isn't her fault. She didn't have access to my information. But it's quite clear that the circumstances as described here are ones which could have been much improved by access to my work. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.